Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on Panzura, Cloud Made Seamless. My name is Brad Kramer with Applied Software, and with me is Kevin Lane, Systems Engineer over at Panzura. This webinar is brought to you by Live Lab Learning, which is a subsidiary of Academic Corporation, a wholly owned applied software company created to provide world-class training. I will be today's moderator for you today. Throughout our presentation, we encourage you to interact with us by typing in questions and comments using the questions pane. We will be answering questions at the end of the presentation, so feel free to fill that question, load them up, and we'll make sure we get to them at the end of the presentation. If you haven't already, search Live Lab Learning on Facebook and like our page to receive the latest information and special offers. When you visit our website, livelablearning.com, there's a complete schedule of upcoming training. Please take note of some upcoming events. So, of course, we have building design and construction, civil infrastructure, and manufacturing classes. And then here are a couple events coming your way. So just for you people in the Savannah and Jacksonville area, we're going to be out there in June this month talking about some of the new features of Autodesk and Panzura. And then, of course, Atlanta on June 23rd, we are going to have Autodesk, and we're going to be doing an executive roundtable there at the Woodruff Arts Center. So for you folks that are interested, please contact marketing at ASTI to register. So with that, I'm going to hand the reins over to Kevin, and he is going to, first, let me go back one, sorry. I thought that was the last slide. Kevin, if you wouldn't mind, go back one. Some upcoming webinars. So June 4th, we've got some new things on infrastructure, 2016 Autodesk software. June 9th, the collaboration for Revit. And on June 11th, we've got BIM 360, Accelerate Project Delivery. So for you general contractors on the call today. Of course, Autodesk has some promotions going on now through the middle of July, July 24th. If you're not familiar, please engage with your account advisor. There's rebates from anything from network activations, new licenses, cross grades from certain products to new products, and also even to the new term-based desktop subscriptions. So make sure you're aware of that, and feel free to contact me or your sales advisor on those opportunities. And with that, I'm going to finally push that over to Kevin Lane, with a systems engineer over at Panzura, and he's going to guide you guys through the presentation today on Panzura.
Thank you, Brad. Again, my name is Kevin Lane, systems engineer with Panzura, and what I'll start off with is just who we are at a glance. So, as it says here, our mission is to enable cloud information, or the cloud infrastructure actually, to be seamless for enterprise users. When someone asks me what we do, I typically answer by saying we are a cloud-backed file system solution. Listed here are some of our top customers, and as I mentioned that we are a cloud-backed file system solution, we partner with the best cloud providers. So if you want a public cloud, we partner with Amazon, Google, and Azure. And if you want your storage to be on-prem, we actually partner with EMC and CleverSafe. Since we are a private company, listed here are several of our Q1 investors, such as the Matrix, which is the actual original investor in Apple, and Colsa. So with Colsa, we're actually part of a $1.3 billion fund. It's one of the largest in the world, created by one of the founders of Sun. We have two people on our advisory board that we'd like to point out, the first being Carl Bass of Autodesk. Carl is not on an advisory board for NetApp or Riverbed or Cisco, but he is for us. And the second one I'd like to point out is Eric Wolford, who is a current board of director of Riverbed and ex-president of Riverbed. Here's a listing of our customer base. As you can see, it ranges across multiple vertical markets, and Panzura brings compelling value to all of these industries. Everything from NBC to NASA and to Motorola. These are big brands which everyone's familiar with, all the way to banks and entertainment companies. Our main focus recently has been in the AEC market, which is also our faster growing market that represents about 75% of all of our new business. AEC companies such as CNS, that we'll discuss a lot about today, are utilizing Panzura for global collaboration, across multiple locations. And an interesting note is that pretty much all of these AEC companies that we have one thing in common, in that they're all using the exact same public cloud. We highly encourage everyone, any of our potential customers, to reach out to any one of our many customer references to speak on Panzura like CMS companies and how they resolve their pain. The nice thing is they've actually tried many things in the past. They might have tried Riverbed and this and that, but it didn't work. So what we have here is just a couple of proven examples. The first one being Graph, in which we saved them $250,000 in hardware costs alone. And we were able to do that for several other companies as well by centralizing the data, taking advantage of single instance storage, and more. What we typically see for the example of the first example here, with that $250,000 in saving, is that the majority of their data that's going to sit on their tier 1 storage is pretty much stale. It doesn't really need to be there. We don't stub it. We actually move it and use the cloud as a back end. And that frees up that tier 1 application storage to be utilized for what it's meant for, which is running high IOP applications. We have a lot more detail coming up later in the presentation, but Eric Hansen's statement here at the bottom from Milwaukee Tool kind of says it all. He says that what Panzura does for every one of our customers, it's the same thing that Panzura does for every one of the customers, which is to make them feel like they're working in basically the same room, which is pretty cool. So here's a quick history of the evolution of apps. Initially, it was simple. Apps and users were directly attached to the data. There was no conflicts, but also it was also difficult to collaborate with anybody else. The result of that was islands of storage for each location. Client-server computing made user collaboration much easier and drove the need to share the files across applications and users in the same location. So applications had to evolve to adjust to a shared storage model, and storage had to adjust to multiple users and multiple applications across the same files. So file locking was required to make sure there were no issues with versions. And over time, businesses had employees or users in distributed offices, not only across the country, but often across the globe. So these employees or users needed to collaborate together, but applications weren't built to work on shared storage across a low latency LAN, especially were made to be on a low latency LAN, not across a high latency WAN as we're experiencing today, such as Revit and AutoCAD and such. So here's a few reasons for that cross-site collaboration. There's going to be definitely a lower cost resources in different areas. There might be unique expertise. So somebody who might be living in San Francisco knows how to do Revit, or somebody maybe in Atlanta doesn't as much, and they can work in the same exact project together. Other reasons, they actually follow the sun model. So people are constantly working on the project all throughout the day, different parts of the world. And again, just to take advantage of resources throughout the company. So here's two types of collaboration, file sync and share versus what we actually offer, which is a global file system. So with the typical file sync and share and just trying to copy things across the different locations, there's cross-site using, say, Office applications that know how to work across regions. And if you were to open up these files, it would say if somebody else has it in use. Whereas for us, with our global file system, we actually take advantage of technical applications. There's file versions with file sync and share, whereas for us, there's file locking, and we take it very seriously. There's multiple copies of files and no authoritative copy, meaning it's not all centrally located with the file sync and share. And for us, there's a single authoritative copy of the file, and that's it. There's additional workflow steps with file sync and share. With us, there's really no end user changes whatsoever. The workflow stays exactly the way they are today. If your users are using a K drive or a P drive or a T drive, by migrating it to a Panzura file system with cloud-backed storage, it stays exactly the same. Large file transfers versus large file collaboration with us as well. So here's a couple of approaches customers have tried before switching over to Panzura. One, they would replicate files between sites. This offered great performance for the remote users. However, what it tends to be is hard to manage. because again, you have that islands of storage. Also, who has the most current version of that project? It's kind of hard to determine sometimes, and the last thing you want to do is overwrite anything that's actually there. Alternatively, we can actually centralize the files at one site, which worked great a couple of years ago, but as these projects continue to grow bigger, it leads to poor performance for the remote users, and but it is much easier to manage. So let's take a little bit deeper of a dive into more detail on these approaches. With the first one, when using this option, you have to manually reconcile versions of the files. You have the potential of overwriting these files as well, which we discussed, and there is lost productivity during this time, many times. You have to manage the islands of storage, and you have to manage backup to the remote locations as well. Two customer examples I like to kind of talk about, one being Graph again with the IT director. He stated about 35% of their project hours were overhead. And basically what that is just time spent managing files instead of actually working on the project. Another firm told us too that one of their projects went out and was constructed without a fire suppression system, which is just crazy because the fire suppression information and specifications were lost in version control hell, and that's exactly word for word from him, which is amazing. We're going to go into another example of that, and I'll use a PowerPoint versus a Revit project in the example to give you an idea of what actually would happen. So option two, this is basically centralizing your data. There's only one copy, the truth, only one file version, no lost work. Everyone's productive. Now, if we can only just fix the slow performance issues, and WAN optimization only helps us a little, which we know very well. We've done very intensive testing of this, and what we discovered is that it's latency. That's actually the issue, not bandwidth. So by popping in a riverbed doesn't necessarily fix the issues. And again, it's latency that's the culprit. So it's all about the amount of time to open and close these files. You're constantly opening, closing, checking, saving, reading. So let's actually just take a look at an example of what happens when we take a very small file. This is just a 1 meg file. It's a small CAD file. And we know if we were to just copy and paste this from one location to the other, even if you had like a T1 between office locations, it would happen very quick. But as we know, what's happening with CAD and Revit, that these are very chatty applications. It's going back and forth between locations. This is actually a real customer example. We did Wireshark captures. We did capture the packets. And we noticed that just to open them, it was taking 4,000 plus open requests. And then the same thing for closing the files. And it's going back and forth with a 43 millisecond latency time. Double that is 86 milliseconds. For this one file to be opened, closed, and changed, it took 22 minutes, which is just unheard of, but it's actually happening. With us, basically, it's still occurring, as you can see here, the open, the closes, the lookups, but instead of going all the way across your low latency WAN link, it's happening there locally. So as you see here, we actually took minutes, which was 22 minutes, down to just 8 seconds in this example. So we tell customers that we take your minutes over to just seconds. And on top of that, like inherent in our product, which we'll get more into detail with, continuous data replication and protection is built in. Bandwidth optimization and savings, because before any data is ever transferred from the local Panzura controller to the WAN, we look at tables that live on every single controller to see if that data has ever been seen out there in the WAN at all. And if it has, it's just a pointer. Here's a customer example. So this is actually a Milwaukee Tool use case. Their challenge is that they have 23 offices in the US and Canada, or in China. They have very high latency of 300 milliseconds, using several different applications out there, taking 40 plus minutes just to open up their projects. So the results are listed here. Large project files open in just seconds. Real-time collaboration across the entire globe. No changes to the user workflow. And these are people that you can call and speak to as well. Our customers love to talk about what they tried and how successful they've been able to be now that they're with Panzura. And centralizing data in the cloud. So how does it work? This is really the magic behind all of it. What we would do is we would deploy a local Panzura controller, either physical or virtual. In this example here showing in New York, it's a physical, and this is kind of like an icon for a virtual controller. And then at every single location, everyone sees everything the same exact way across, no matter where you're located. Everything we do is global. It's global read and write. So if a user in New York wants to put some data out there, we're going to kick through the example here. So a file is actually going to be changed. We're actually going to split that data. We're going to break it apart from the metadata, which is the data about the data, and the actual data payload itself. So we're going to shoot that metadata into the authoritative copy of the cloud, and that's going to be copied down to every other location where a Panzura controller lives in that cloud file system. Everyone has that directory listing now. That metadata lives everywhere in every single Panzura controller. And it's also a data deduplication table. It's a global data deduplication table that lives on every single Panzura controller. That's what we take advantage of to actually see, before we send it to the authoritative store in the cloud, that payload of the data. And it's done as in zeros and ones, so it's extremely fast. So along with the data in multiple locations, we also leverage data protection and disaster recovery, in that if all 3 sites here in this example were to lose their local controller, the data is still safe and secure in one such location, being that cloud-back storage. All we'd have to do in that case is deploy another controller, point it to the authoritative store with all of your credentials, and you have access to all your data once again. We have a global file locking mechanism. We take file locking extremely seriously. So let me show you what's going to happen here after the data is actually written out to the cloud. So if somebody over here in England wants to actually open that file, as you saw, the lock actually gets transferred over from one Panzura controller over to the other. And then at that point in time, the user over here in England, for example, owns that lock in that file. We take locking extremely seriously. Files can never be opened more than one time, and we never run into any file merge conflicts, which would lead the administrator to determine how best to resolve them. So going back to what Graf had said about overwriting that fire suppression system, what my example happens to be is, if I was to open this PowerPoint presentation, say Brad and I were both working on it together, and Brad wanted to go in there and open that file up at the exact same time that I did, and he would be able to do so because other technologies sometimes wait about 60 seconds before they're writing things to the cloud, and no locking mechanism between controllers. So if Brad wanted to change the title page and change his name to somebody else who might be presenting next week, and I wanted to insert a couple of slides, if he saved the document before me and I saved it afterwards, I actually trump his save, and everything he did is gone. Now, I can easily open up a PowerPoint presentation and determine between the two which are different and where the changes happen to be. But going back to Graf's example of the fire suppression system being removed from a Revit project, I wouldn't even know where to begin to try to determine where something was changed, moved in a project versus being something simple that I could open up with a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation. So something else that really sets us apart from anyone else in the market is SmartSync too. What we actually do and utilize is, we talk a lot about the global deduplication table that lives on every single Panzura controller, and the metadata lives on every single Panzura controller as well. Well, during a high collaboration effort, like doing multiple project syncs at the same time, maybe you have 10 offices all working on the same Revit project, and something is being written to the cloud but not quite written there yet. We'll know it's not the latest and greatest version living here in New York, but somebody up here needs to modify and change that project. What we can do is take advantage of that metadata, take advantage of that global deduplication table, and say, of this file, what changed? So just send me over the zeros and ones. In the past, we would actually have to send the entire file across controller to controller. Now we're taking advantage of what lives there already. The majority of the data is already sitting there. So what we do is just send those zeros and ones. It makes us about 80 times quicker during high collaboration efforts, which is amazing. On top of that, we have compression, which is listed here, encryption. So before anything is ever written to the cloud when it has to be written, we're going to dedupe it, compress it, encrypt it, and then send it up. So everything is always encrypted in flight and encrypted in rest. We are FIPS 140-2 certified, not to be confused with any kind of military-grade encryption. This actually certification means that we're certified to be utilized for the government. And we have the Department of Justice as our customer. We have NASA and other government agencies as well. Also inherent with our product is snapshots, which is our backup scheme. So if you guys are doing your daily backups, keeping us to 14 days, we check our snapshot technology, and we put in 14 days there, and we keep our snapshots right in the authoritative copy of the cloud as well. If you want to do weekly, monthly, yearly, totally fine as well. And that's our backup and disaster recovery, which is also inherent, as well as LAN optimization. So just a few more examples. So data distribution, if you were to do it without Panzura, here's an example of what's going to actually happen. So across a multi-site global enterprise, what the distribution of Revit files across all 5 of these organizations, for example, to do that over an MPLS network, it's going to take a long time, because in order to feed that data to 5 different offices, it must be sent from the source 5 times. So effectively reducing their 10 meg pipe to just 2. And this is because of the overall network bandwidth. It's got to drop to the lowest common denominator. So if we put in a Panzura controller and we centralize all your data in the cloud, that Revit file is loaded into the cloud once and then shared with the 5 locations in parallel. So it's effectively leveraging the full advantage of the cloud provider's network to distribute that file. So which in this case, in a full 10 meg at each location, this translates to actually about 25 times faster, because again, it's no longer cutting that pipe into 2 meg chunks. So additionally, Panzura makes sure that all the changes and updates are kept in sync in real time. So if someone in Orlando wants to make a change to the Revit file, that change is pushed out to the authoritative version of that file in the cloud in real time. And subsequently, then those changes are also distributed to all other 4 locations. So everyone is always looking at the current version of the file at the exact same time. So visually, this basically shows us what's going to happen. Typical environment out there where we have WAN optimization at every single location, file servers or NAS systems, whatever it might happen to be. Maybe you're backing it up at those different locations as well. So what's going to happen with a centralized storage and global file system is there's going to be a single copy of the project files available to all sites. There's no mirrors, no waiting. There's no backups. There's no disk. WAN optimization actually inherent to our product. And again, that cloud-backed storage can be any one of the providers you see out here. Another example, again, using Graph as their example here. We have a real snapshot of their rack, but this is just put in here to make it easier to see. They had everything. They were using WAN optimization, multiple Windows file servers. They had an EMC SAN, NAS. They were backing up the data domain, which I used to sell myself. They were backing it up with an HPE backup server. They had a tape loader, plus all their MPLS networks. All that was able to be removed. We actually put in internet circuits, a small Panzura controller to basically cache about 10% of their data that was hot. Everything else basically sits out there in the cloud. It simplified IT, reduced costs, of course, as you can see there, and it also increased their entire VR infrastructure as well. So overall, it's all about what's going to be there on-prem. It's 90% smaller of a footprint, as you saw in that example, but plus everything is going to be a lot faster. Even in the locations where your data might be centralized today, where things are running good for your end users, our controllers, if you were to get a physical controller, they're all SSD. So they're the fastest technology that's out there available right now. Even locally in that location, when users double click on those files, it might be 30, 40, 50% faster even there. And the user experience is always going to be great because of how fast the technology happens to be. But of course, across the WAN, that's where you're going to see your big benefits. Instead of taking minutes, it's going to be just seconds. The controllers deployment options that we actually have today are your physical controllers. Again, they're going to be all SSD. If you have
3,000 that came back yesterday. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I thought there was a question. We can have physical controllers or virtual if your infrastructure supports it. These can be an OVF. You just
muted.
We offer 3 different flavors of them. It'll be 1.3 terabytes, 3.5, or 8 terabytes for the 3 different options of virtual controllers. Again, we try to match what the physical controller would be. So going with all SSD, because they're going to be extremely fast, the end user experience is going to be phenomenal. They're going to be very happy with the performance. If you have a very slow, old hard disk array that you wanted to put a virtual controller on, the end user experience wouldn't be as good as it would be with their physical box. But again, we definitely support it. Usually I see this going into our government customers out there where they have the tons and tons of disk storage, all SSD, tons of memory, and tons of CPU to actually support the VMs, but definitely can do that as well. I have a couple more slides here, not two, actually two more. What I like to do is just kind of to point out a use case of DOJ. The reason why is it kind of answers a lot of our security questions about how secure we actually are. And also, it also addresses that we can be very large, like in this case here, 265 sites. CNS Companies is on the right. They have 16 different locations. But it's not to say we don't have customers with 2. Actually, some of our references out here, like Eric for CNS Companies, would say if he had to start all over with a brand new company and had just 1 location, he would actually use a Panzura controller just for 1 as well, because of all the things that actually inherently come with the solution. So going back to DOJ, this is what they were dealing with. They were always running out of storage. You guys might be experiencing the same thing, in such that you deal with somebody about a year ago and you say you're good to go for 3 or 4 years of growth, and in like 6 months to 12 months, you're pretty much pushing the limits of the storage again. That's because the unstructured data is growing like crazy. And now if you're looking at doing things with drones or taking additional pictures and trying to store that somewhere, it's got to sit somewhere, and it's going to be a very expensive internal footprint that can definitely go out to the cloud, especially when you find out the majority of data is not being accessed or modified, typically in 30 days. What we see is about 90% of your data is not being accessed or modified once we hit that 60-day mark. For them, the results is they never run out of storage because their storage is expandable in the back end. And they reduce their cost by 75%. Again, it's a huge customer example, but we see savings almost everywhere we go, or definitely make things improved. The challenge on the right-hand side for CNS Companies, they had 16 different locations, taking a long time to actually open up these projects. SyncWeb Central, if it actually worked, it was frequently failing, but it would take a long time to actually do it when it did work. And they had rising network costs when it came down to MPLS networks. This would be more traditional to what you guys are seeing. The Panzura compliances, they're basically a Windows Server replacement at each location. They join Active Directory just like a Windows file server would. In this case here, he centralized all this data to Amazon. He went from, at the bottom there, 100 terabytes of data living in different locations. So of the 16 different sites, by first consolidating it down, you're going to take advantage of single instance storage, of course. But then before we write the data up to the cloud, it's going to be deduped, compressed, encrypted, like we talked about, and then sitting out there. And I think today is at like 21 or 22 terabytes. He sent us his bill. A lot of our customers do. So his annual bill, or his monthly bill actually with Amazon, it's $30 per terabyte per month. His latest bill is about $630 per month to store that 21 terabytes of data. Of that $638, $605 was for the actual storage. And then for what we hear a lot of times from customers is just a little bit of FUD, industry FUD, that says that it's very expensive to transfer that files around. So not so much as the storage is expensive, but his puts, lists, gets, directory listings, all that stuff totaled to about $15 for his month. He had 18 million of one and 1.8 million of another. I can't remember which ones they are, but if you guys want to see that bill, I'd be more than happy to send it to you as well. Overall, he saved about $400,000 in that year. And now he can basically take unlimited snapshots and hold everything he needs to for any litigation holds. So with that, I'll actually open it up to any questions that you guys might have. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward. Again, we just pop in a local Panzura controller. We migrate your data to it. Authoritatively, it all sits in the cloud. Everyone has one single look and feel of all the data that's out there.
Hey, Kevin, this is Brad. One question. When folks go to back up their data, they pick a cloud store. Typically, what kind of cost can they expect with backing up their data through Amazon or Azure or whatever?
Sure. Great question. So with our product, again, the backups are inherent. So if you had, say, 10 terabytes of data, and we're going to write that through a Panzura controller to the cloud, you might see, say, 30% compression just in the first time you write it through. So living inside of Amazon, for example, that 10 terabytes will compress down to, say, 7, and you're going to pay $30 per month for that 7 terabytes, so $210 a month. Now, if you're going to do backups of that data, our snapshot technology actually instantly takes a snapshot, so there's no extra charge for that snapshot until changes actually occur. But what we usually see with our unstructured data is that the change rate is minimal, especially when you're dealing with these files that are not touched after, say, 30 days of the files being created. If we match your recovery point objective, recovery time objectives of what you have out there today, we take advantage of that in the cloud as well. So their snapshots are just pointers to block level changes that actually occur within those files. So a very minimal amount of overhead would be for the snapshots, and very low cost.
Another question, if something was to happen to the physical site, the office, a hurricane, tornado, fire, how quickly can that office spin their data back up and get a new device?
Sure. If you guys have a physical box, we have gold support, which the box will be there the next business day. The hurricane going through, I live in Florida, so I know they can go through pretty quick, and maybe you'll be back in business again if the power is actually up and running. But we can actually have a box out there the next day. You can actually kick off a VM. Our best practice is to have a high available system so that if something like that was to occur, you have a tornado or a hurricane or such, we can actually fail over that entire site to another Panzura controller elsewhere inside of our solution proposal to you guys. This way, the lock management, as we discussed, we take it very seriously. You can't have any files that are open more than one time. Now, when you talk about things like Revit, where we're doing bit level locking, that's a different story. We actually tested and certified 10 simultaneous sync central at the same exact time with a Revit model. But those file locks for that site that potentially could go down, we would just basically fail it over to a different location. Another option is to front end that data with Microsoft distributed file systems in such a way that if a site was to go down, you'd be redirected to a different Panzura because the file system is global.
One more question. Folks, we talked about Revit. What about AutoCAD as far as, folks that have drawings that have dozens of XREFs, if they put those up into the cloud with Panzura, would Panzura maintain those relationships with the X references, et cetera? Gotcha.
So as long as we're not changing anything, if you guys are pointing to that T drive or P drive, whatever it happens to be for your XREFs, then everything stays exactly the same. All we're doing when you're looking at those XREFs is it's going to like R/something. In that case, we're just basically on the computer side changing that drive letter from being a file server or a NAS over to a Panzura controller, or maybe front-ending it again with BFS. We keep that drive letter intact so that everything else stays exactly the same. And when you open up those files, it just basically redirects them to the Panzura controller, which will be a lot faster.
All right. We still have a few people on. Anybody have any questions? Any more questions? Feel free. There's a pane. Should be over on, depending where you put your thing, over on the right or left, and you can ask questions. We'll stay on here for just a little bit longer. Right now we don't have any more questions, but I'd love to get some more questions from the folks that attended. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and close out the webinar. I'll just give it a couple more seconds here, and then we'll close it out.
And if anybody has any questions going forward, Brad, I'm sure we can reach out to everybody with all of our contacts. Please feel free to email us. any one of us, and would be happy to answer any further questions that you might have.
Okay, yeah, looks like we don't have any questions. Oh, we just got one. That always happens. I say there's no more, and then somebody pops up with one. Yes, there will be a video copy of the webinar. We put everything on YouTube, so make sure to check out Live Lab Learning on the YouTube channel, and there's probably some other Panzura webinars on there as well. So from us. So, but this one will probably be up there in the next day or so. So just be on the lookout for it. And you will receive an email if you registered. So we'll make sure we get to you. All right. Well, I think that's it. Thanks everybody for taking time. If you're on the East Coast, we look forward to catching you on the next webinar. And like Kevin said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your sales advisor at Applied Software, myself, or the folks at Panzura. We love to engage with you guys and fix some long-standing issues and the kind of the way the cloud's transforming the IT infrastructure and connecting remote users and remote offices as well. It's a really exciting time, and we look forward to working with you. With that, we're going to conclude the webinar, and we'll see you guys next time. Appreciate it. Thank you.